Okay. So, I'd like to thank Dean Alexander, Steve, Eva, for organizing this. It is a pleasure to be here. I particularly can't wait to get back to the University of Michigan, the home of the victors valiant, and proudly display the mug that I picked up here today. Fortunately, the name is almost impossible to read, and the color is blue, so it could easily be mistaken for something that it should be. Okay,
we'll get to the basketball.
Okay, so I work with the National Registry of Exonerations. This is our website. There you see a picture of Richard Phillips, an exoneree, one of the most recent ones. He served 45 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. This is, it's sort of silly to say this, but our current record holder among the exonerated defendants. We tabulate and circulate stories on and do research on exonerations in the United States since 1989. As you can see there, we now have 2,195 of them. The group exonerations or the mass exonerations that we're here to talk about are not included in that list. That's the first thing to tell you. And it's not because we don't know about them. If you were diligent and picked this up on the way in, there's a handout on group exonerations that describes what we say about them, what we know about them, and it includes this table, which I don't think you're going to be able to read from there, that is an update of one that we circulated in a report that we published, released in 2012. We've known about group exonerations since before the Exoneration Registry went public. But we don't list them because they're a different type of exoneration than the ones that we do list. And mostly what I want to do is first explain why, and second tell you what we do know about group exonerations. Why are they different? We define an exoneration as a case in which a person was convicted of a crime and then later cleared of all the consequences of that crime by dismissal, by acquittal on retrial, or by pardon, in a case in which that outcome depended on new evidence of innocence, new evidence, affirmative evidence of innocence, or evidence that undercut the prosecution's case that was not available at the time of the original conviction. Our background contention is that this definition of exoneration, which depends not on our judgment about innocence, but on the actions of officials who have the authority to make these decisions, creates a good proxy for innocence, that the overwhelming majority of the people in this category are innocent. It is not something we can prove directly, because we don't make our own judgments and don't think we can make our own judgments about guilt or innocence. But as far as we can tell, that is true. Nothing has come out that indicates otherwise. These are cases, overwhelmingly, in which the defendants and their representatives had to go to huge lengths to get to the point of what we call exoneration, having the charges against them dismissed or getting an acquittal and retrial. As a result of detailed re-examinations, re-investigations of the facts of their convictions lasting years, sometimes decades. Group exonerations are different in one major respect, and the definition we use of them, which you see in this handout, is exoneration of a group of innocent defendants who were deliberately framed and convicted of crimes as a result of large-scale patterns of police perjury and corruption. The difference here is that once a pattern like that gets uncovered, what sometimes happens, not always, but what sometimes happens, what happens in the groups you see here, or if you look at this one in slightly more detail for several of them there, what happens is that the authorities turn their focus not to the individual defendants who are being exonerated, but to the corrupt police officer or the corrupt police officers, and say in one form or another, boy, all the cases that these officers handled are under a cloud and perhaps should be dismissed, or in some cases they all are dismissed. And the result then is dismissals of sometimes half a dozen, sometimes a dozen, sometimes hundreds. In Philadelphia, in the cases that Brad Bridge has been handling for decades now, literally what's now going on 1,200 or 1,400 of these cases. Long lists of defendants who have in common the fact that the officers who handled their cases, who arrested them, who brought those cases, turn out now to be individually corrupt or more commonly part of a conspiracy of corrupt officers. These cases that we have here are not the earliest ones that we know about. The earliest one that we know about was in 1929. This was a scam that was run in New York City, but I suspect similar ones happen in other cities, where police officers would basically frame women for prostitution. They would send a man, they would hire somebody to go to their apartment, knock on the door, find on some pretext, get inside, and then a couple minutes later a police officer would arrive and arrest, claiming that some informant had told them this was going on, arrest the woman because she was in the company of some unknown man. The police officer would lie about what he saw when he entered the apartment, and then the case would be handed over to defense attorneys, bail bondsmen, and judges who all took bribes, or took fees and bribed each other. And they'd be convicted. And eventually it came out, and there were a series of exonerations. There was pardons by the governor. How long has things like that been going on? I don't know, probably since the advent of organized urban policing. How common? We don't know. The ones that you see here, the ones that you see in this list, are overwhelmingly cases in which the underlying crimes are said to be drug possession or drug distribution. They're basically all one of the aspects, one of the tragedies that are inflicted on the country, that we inflict on ourselves in the so-called war on drugs. And the ones you see here are not the earliest ones. There was one that we learned about that occurred in Vermont around 1970. What was it? In 1971, right. The governor of Vermont pardoned 71 defendants who were convicted of drug crimes based on testimony of a state trooper who was caught systematically lying and framing innocent defendants. And the ones that we found out about, those several and this whole list, are not the only ones that occurred. We've identified similar scandals in other cities in which the police and the prosecutors were not interested in pursuing the cases that were handled by these officers who were caught lying, cheating, extorting money, and framing innocent defendants. So that's the background of what these cases are. Why are they not listed on the registry together with Richard Phillips and the other people that we do list? And the basic reason is that they're just fundamentally very different things. And they are extremely important cases. We have promised since the time that we first went public that we would devote more attention to them. We have not had a chance to do that in any significant extent. We are going to do that now. This has become a project that we're going to focus on in the coming year, in part because there are right now 3 ongoing group exonerations that we're aware of, where the process of exonerating and releasing defendants because of these scandals that have been uncovered is going on in real time. And you'll be hearing about all 3 of them. The one in Chicago, which has been going on and off for must be 20-some years now. One in, that's in Philadelphia, one in Chicago, and one in Baltimore. And the people who are responsible for those are all going to be speaking to you later today. We know far less about these cases than about the individual exonerations. In some of the cases, some of the groups, we don't know the number of people who were exonerated. In most of them, we don't know the names of the people who were exonerated. For some, we may be able to get all those names. There are lists, very long lists in some cases, but even knowing the names doesn't provide us with the background information about the cases that we have for the individual cases. And the process that produces these exonerations includes, in many of the groups, far less information about what went wrong in the case. What you usually know is that these particular officers were involved, but we don't always know how they were involved or what their role was. And as a result, the type of confidence we have that this is a case that wouldn't have got here but for overwhelming evidence of innocence in the individual case is not there for all these cases, and in some of them we're not likely to be able to say with any confidence whether they were innocent or guilty. What we can say is that they all got unfair trials and were convicted on the basis of corrupt behavior by police. So these very much deserve to be studied, and we hope to get to it. I want to say just a couple of words about two other sets of cases that are a little bit different from the ones I've just been talking about, but also involve exonerations of large groups of people. The first are a set of cases where there are mass forensic exonerations. The two large ones, the two ones that are just gargantuan, are both in Massachusetts, and the lawyers from the ACLU who were involved in them are here to speak today. They involve, in one case, 21,500 cases, more or less, that were dismissed because a forensic examiner by the name of Annie Dukin was systematically dry labbing her cases, that is to say, filing reports about what controlled substances she supposedly found in the samples she was supposed to test without ever testing the substances. Basically saying whatever the cops thought was there was there. And then a huge but somewhat smaller case where nearly 8,000 additional convictions were dismissed, just 2 days ago, I think? Because of a different but equally bad pattern of misconduct by Sonia Farak, another forensic examiner at a state laboratory in Massachusetts. In those cases, there is definitely corrupt behavior by by government officials, but it's not the arresting officers. It's not what brings the person into the system. It's corrupt behavior after people are arrested for drug possession by cops in dozens of different jurisdictions that then basically rubber stamps the arrest and says, because you were arrested, I now will lie and say there is evidence that this person, chemical evidence this person is guilty. Those are extremely important cases, but in yet a different category. And then there are several sets of reviews of forensic evidence, that systematic reviews of large sets of cases with forensic evidence that have been conducted in different parts of the countries that aren't group or mass exonerations by any account. The biggest ones involve compositional bullet lead analysis, a type of forensic evidence that's now been deeply discredited. Barry and Peter from the Innocence Project worked with the FBI and the Department of Justice in reviewing those cases. A similar review of cases involving microscopic hair comparisons. There's a review of arson cases by the Texas Forensic Commission. In those cases, and there have been reviews in several jurisdictions of DNA analyses based on potentially questionable analyses of mixed samples. All of those cases are looking for individual cases in which innocent defendants were convicted by bad forensic evidence. They've produced between them a handful of exonerations. I don't know the exact number, but something on the order of 10 or 15 or so. But those are individual exonerations. Those are cases in which these are leads that are pursued to see case by case whether there is convincing evidence of innocence. There was also a review of a large batch of otherwise unexamined DNA evidence in Virginia that produced 12 exonerations, again, individual exonerations. they're different. Those cases are different from these ones in a couple of really important respects, and I just want to mention those and then I'll stop. What do we see about these cases that hold them together? Well, the first is these are all drug cases. One of the things that everybody who works in this area knows is that getting that type of permission to exonerate defendants based on, one bullet, right, bad officer involved, can happen in drug cases and does happen in some of these groups in drug cases, but will not happen in cases where the defendants were convicted of violent crimes, even by the same type of misconduct by police, even by worse misconduct by police. Even if there was a commission to study torture by police officers in Chicago, and it's produced several exonerations, but not as a mass event. These are ones that are fought over individually, case by case. And then second, and the last point I'm going to make, you'll notice if you look over in the right-hand column on this slide, and then on this one, and on this one, that we have the race or ethnicity of the defendants involved, and in all the cases where we know about them, they are overwhelmingly minorities. In most of them, they're overwhelmingly African Americans. In a few, they're overwhelmingly Hispanic. But this is a punishment that is visited on minority communities as part of the war on drugs. That's primarily what you're seeing here. Okay, that's it.